Hello. Is this working or is it just on for fun?
It's working. Or it will be working in a moment. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Shakespeare & Company. This is our final reading of 2018, and I can't think of a more festive way to finish our season than with tonight's guest. For over 40 years and across more than 100 books, Michael Morpurgo has entertained, educated, and perhaps most importantly, enchanted children and adults in Britain, France, and across the world. There are many possible explanations for the extensive and enduring appeal of Michael Morpurgo's imagination. There's his love for the underdog and for tales of survival against the odds, often inspired by real events. There's his advocacy for the natural world and for a greater understanding of our place within it. There's his conviction that we can live better lives by learning from and living in harmony with other animals. And of course, there's his ceaseless quest to shine a light on the bedrock of compassion that endures even when our so-called leaders drag us into the most dehumanizing of human activity, war. On top of all of this, Michael Morpurgo is an author who loves, respects and trusts his young readers for their intelligence, for their capacity to grapple with thorny moral conundrums and complex relationships, and for their refusal to be spooked at the sight of an unfamiliar vocabulary or expressions from bygone days. His readers sense this trust, love and respect and return it in spades. I won't list all of Michael Morpurgo's publications. I want to leave him some time to speak after all. But this year alone, he has published 2 books set during the Second World War, Flamingo Boy, which tells the story of a young autistic boy in Camargue, and In the Mouth of the Wolf, a tale of espionage and resistance with stunning artwork by Barru. In addition, he's completed a new translation of The Little Prince, which will delight readers unfamiliar with Saint-Exupéry's masterpiece and help those already familiar with the book to see it with fresh eyes. He also found the time to reimagine Raymond Briggs's wintry classic The Snowman, and let us not forget the infinitely charming Grandpa Christmas, beautifully illustrated by Jim Field, which we're going to hear read tonight. Among many other notable works, Michael Morpurgo is the author of Why the Whales Came, Waiting for Anya, Listen to the Moon, Kensuke's Kingdom, and of course his 1982 classic War Horse, which was adapted for the stage by the National Theatre in 2007 and in 2011 was adapted for cinema by Steven Spielberg. Michael Morpurgo has won many prizes, including the Smarties Prize, the Writers Guild Award and the Blue Peter Book Award, as well as a hat-trick of Prix Saucière here in France. From 2003 to 2005, he was the Children's Laureate. 4, a hat-trick plus 1.
The 4th is really important. Just thought I'd say that.
As well as a 4-time winner of the Prix Saucière here in France. We can edit that in post-production. From 2003 to 2005, he was the Children's Laureate, a position he helped found with his friend Ted Hughes. We're absolutely delighted to have him at Shakespeare & Company tonight. Please join me in welcoming Michael Morpurgo.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you so much.
Wonderful.
For being
it's a shame you didn't list all the books. It makes me feel very good when well, it justifies if you've been alive 75 years and you can count a certain number of books. Well, it's okay.
Do you have an exact count for us?
No.
We're edging towards 130, 140, something like that. Yeah. And one of the most recent, of course, and which we're going to hear from tonight, is Grandpa Christmas.
Yeah.
So before we hear the story read to us, perhaps you could introduce the book a little bit for us.
Yes. I think, like all the books you become very fond of very quickly, it's not just a matter of one person sitting down in a room and thinking this is a good idea. It's other people coming and suggesting. And in this case, as with another book which we're going to talk about, it was a publisher's idea to put an illustrator and myself together. There's an illustrator called Jim Field who's sitting here. He's English, but he's lucky enough to live in France. He lives in Paris. And he's a wonderful, wonderful illustrator. I'd never worked with him before. And the publisher thought, well, if we put together Jim Field, who is young and quite hip, and you're old and not hip, that might be interesting. And also, maybe something interesting could come out of that. So I had this idea in my head. I'd already written a sort of poem, I suppose, for the World Wildlife Fund, about the planet, about how precious it is and should be for all of us. And that was made into I think Jeremy Irons made a little video of it, and they used it for, I suppose, fundraising. But I liked it so much, and I particularly liked hearing him read it, that I thought, well, why don't I try and make this into a book, and asked Jim if he would do the illustrations. And that's what happened. And remarkable things happen when you do that. I won't point anyone out in this room, but there's an extraordinary thing that happened. He drew the central character in such a way that it entirely resembles a very dear friend of mine who's sitting in this room here at the moment, and you must not look around to find out which person this is. But later in the evening, you will meet him and shake him by the hand, and he is the grandpa in this book, without any doubt at all, and Jim had never seen him before. It's quite extraordinary. I don't know how you did it. Don't tell me, Jim, because it's going to be... Anyway, so what we thought we'd do is to have it read not by me, but by my granddaughter, Eloise, who is lucky enough to work in this lovely place, and Claire, who's lucky enough to be my wife. She will be doing some of the reading, and my granddaughter will be doing the rest. So they're going to stand here. They're sharing a microphone because we can't afford more than one. And I hope you enjoyed it. We're not going to be able to see the illustrations at the same time. This is already becoming an argument. It didn't take long.
You ready? Every year at Christmas, I fetch the box of Christmas tree decorations from the cupboard under the stairs. That's also where we keep the diary I wrote when I was little. On the cover, on which I had drawn dozens of daisies of all colours, I had written, "Mia's diary, keep out." I always take this diary out and hide it amongst the branches at the bottom of the tree. It's never that well hidden. There'd be no point. Everyone knows it's there. It always has been, and they know why it is there too, and they pile all the presents around it. Our children, the whole family, know what's kept inside the diary. It's a letter. My grandpa's letter to me. Reading that letter aloud, after all the presents have been opened, is as much a part of our family Christmas as Christmas cake and Christmas carols. Like me, they all know parts of Grandpa's letter by heart. Sometimes they even join in while I'm reading it. Here is what Grandpa wrote.
To my little granddaughter Mia, from her grandpa. Dearest little Mia, this Christmas, instead of a Christmas card, you'll have plenty of those, and instead of a present, you'll have plenty of those too. I am sending you a letter. A letter from Grandpa. Not very exciting, perhaps, but it'll be different at least. Scrunch it up if you want to, but I don't think you will. Excuse the wobbly writing. Remember last week you were helping me in the vegetable garden. I had hurt my back, so you were doing the digging for me and stopping to show me every time you found another worm. And I was telling you to be careful with them, how worms are our friends, how good they are for the soil, how they help us grow our vegetables, and how the blackbirds and thrushes need them too. And you weren't in the slightest bit interested. You were too busy giggling as you held up each worm to show me. As I sat there watching you, pencil in hand, I was making a list of the seeds we needed for planting out the vegetable garden. Broad beans, my favourite, sweet corn, your favourite, seed potatoes, the Wilder variety because Grandma always thought them best for baking, as well as poppy seeds and foxglove seeds because the butterflies and bees love them. As I watched you digging away happily with your trowel and humming to yourself, my heart was full of love for you, Mia, and I wanted to write this letter to you because there is so much I wish for you in your life. I have loved these days when you come with me to my garden. I love everything. I love above everything your delight in it all, in that wriggly worm dangling from your fingers, in that thrush you keep calling a blackbird. Just to see you digging there in the good earth, so full of joys of being alive, fills me with happiness and hope. And there was the moment you found the frog and came running over to show me with cupped hands. We watched him hopping away into the long grass, and you hopped back to your digging again. Have you ever seen a picture of us, of this earth of ours, from space, Mia? We are a bright blue bead spinning through infinity, a beacon of life. But one day, if we do not care for her, this good earth of ours will be as arid and lifeless as the moon. The life of this world is as fragile as you are, as I am, as trees are, as butterflies and bees and birds are, as worms and frogs are, as plants are. If I have learnt one thing for sure in my long life, 73 this year, Mia, and that's old, it is this. Earth is a living, breathing being, and we must hurt her no more. We are using her up, fouling the air and the sea, making a dustbin of the land, a sewer of the oceans, and a graveyard of her creatures. We have to learn to love our Earth again, love her as much as I love you and you love me. For you and I, we are part of this living planet, part of Earth's great family, and we are her guardians too. So I wish for you, little Mia, and for all children everywhere, a new world without war and waste, where children like you will be able to breathe in good, clean air and drink from clear, bright water, a new time when we grow and eat only what we need, no more, and learn to share all we have, so that no one anywhere goes hungry again. I wish no tree ever to be cut down without planting 3 more in its place. I wish for you a world where in flying our planes, driving our cars, heating our homes, in our endless striving to be ever more prosperous, ever more comfortable, we do not overheat the planet, do not melt the ice caps, raise the oceans, and so bring famine and flood and fire down upon ourselves. I wish for you a world where the whale and the dolphin, the turtle and the jellyfish can live the life of the deep undisturbed in seas unpolluted. Those same seas, dear little Mia, where we have paddled and played so often on our summer holidays, do you remember? I wish for you a world where the elephant and the lion, the tiger and the orangutan can live wild and free, never locked up and imprisoned simply for our entertainment, but left to themselves in their forests, left to roam their plains and their deserts, left to live their lives in peace. These we have loved together, Mia, the seas, the trees, the blackbird, or the thrush, whichever you wish it to be, that wriggly worm, that jumping frog, the good soil you are digging in, the moon, the stars, our whole wonderful earth rolling through space. So look after all we have loved together. Live always in rhythm, in harmony with this earth. Then all my wishes will come true for you, and all shall be well. But all shall be well only if we make it well, little Mia. There is a lot of healing to do, a lot of loving. Your grandpa.
When the reading is over, we all stand up and say, "Happy Christmas, Grandpa. Happy Christmas, everyone." And then we have a family huddle hug, as we call it, arms around each other in a circle. I always like to think that Grandpa is there in the middle of that circle, with us. It's almost as if he has become our Grandpa Christmas.
Bravo.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And that's a bit of dust in my eye. That's all it is. That I think anyone who's familiar with your work will notice a lot of classic Morpurgo concerns in that short book we just had, and I think that's the first time I've ever had an entire book read at a reading, but one that's so full. But one of let's say the classic Morpurgo concerns is this sense of generational transmission, which perhaps as a grandfather yourself, it might not be a surprise that's a concern of you, but in fact it's been in your work for many years, from more or less from the beginning. And I was just wondering why you think that is.
Well, I was a teacher, by profession, and I suppose every teacher standing in front of a class of kids, you know that's what you're there for. You're there. There's a wonderful writer in English called Alan Bennett, who writes wonderful plays, and he says in one of his characters says in his play The History Boys that the teacher is only there to pass it on, that it's all you're there for. You pass on what it is that you care about, what you love about, and it's personal. So every good teacher there's ever been is doing that. Not my favourite teacher I'm thinking of at the moment was someone who I didn't really like very much. But he used to sit on the corner of a desk. This is when I was at university. And he would read, there's a book called, a long poem called Gawain and the Green Knight, which many people here will know about. Well, I'd never really heard it before, and he read it in the old language, and I understood 10% of it. I was lucky. But what I gathered from the way in which he was reading it was that he was passionate about it. This really meant something to him. And then it wasn't the teacher you cared about, it was this passing on that he was doing. And I had it from my mother. I was very lucky in the sense that she would spend 20 minutes, less maybe, of an evening sitting on bed with my brother Peter would be there. We usually shared the same room and therefore shared the same story. And it really mattered to us that she was there. And when she read, you knew she meant it. She only read the poems and the stories she loved. So what was that? That was the passing of a message, both of love between child and mother, but also of what it was that she loved. So yeah, I suppose I learned that from the cradle in that sense, and then when you get to be a grandfather, you absolutely know it's true, that's for sure.
I'm fascinated to know which stories your mother would read to you, which were some of her favourites.
Well, she came from a generation that liked Rudyard Kipling and John Masefield and Walter de la Mare. Actually, people who are not read that often now, people see The Jungle Book as a film. It was a book before. No, she loved it, and she loved language that she could play with. There's one story I remember in particular, which was The Elephant's Child, which about do you know The Elephant's Child? Yes. Do you know The Elephant's Child? You just said yes, exactly as children do when they fret, and you do know The Elephant's Child. Isn't it great? And you now know, don't you? It's nothing to do with Darwin at all. You know exactly why an elephant got its long trunk, don't you? Kipling told you so. Tell me.
Because one elephant was curious about everything.
Yes.
And so
like children are sometimes.
Yes.
Yes.
And so he asked. He wanted to know what a crocodile ate for dinner. And so he went and he met a snake, and he asked the snake if he knew, and the snake said no, and so he went on, and then he met the crocodile, but he didn't know it was a crocodile, so he asked him, and the crocodile said, I eat elephants, and so the crocodile pulled the nose, and the nose became very, very long, but then on the other side, the snake helped the elephant, so the snake pulled the elephant on the other side, so the trunk became
longer and longer.
Yeah, longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
And then the crocodile finally let go, and that's how the elephant got his long
But isn't it great?
trunk.
Isn't that better than Darwin? Will you give her a clap, please? Isn't that great? So I heard that story younger than that, and you really don't forget it. All that's really annoying is that he wrote it before I could write it, because I'd have written it much better.
Well, you have reimagined certain stories. Have you ever considered going back and reimagining?
No, because the
Kipling
language is so wonderful to leave it be.
Okay.
Really. No, I've done retellings usually of stories that seem not to be read now by children, and that is usually because film has taken it away a bit. And that's happened time and time again, which is a shame, but very often it's down to language. So most kids these days don't read Treasure Island by my favourite writer of all time, Robert Louis Stevenson. And they don't read it because the language is a bit strange. They may see a film of it or a television series of it, but they don't read it much. I considered rewriting that at one point, and then I thought, I just like it in the original too much. Leave it alone.
I mentioned in the introduction your love of language and the fact that you don't shy away from using what might be considered complicated language or language vocabulary that perhaps some of your younger readers might not understand. And that struck me as perhaps less and less common these days as well. There seems to be a sort of a desire that children should be able to understand every piece of vocabulary they come across in books.
Yes, there's a problem, isn't there? The problem seems to be that we do, as a society, talk down to children too much. We offer them if you like, the succulent bits, because we know they're going to like it or laugh at it, and we want to see the reaction of pleasure that they get from whatever it is we're offering. And that is patronising them. I mean, what we know with children is that the only difference between them and us is they're smaller. The rest is the same. They have a terrific intelligence, they have great sensibility, they have great curiousness. And it seems to me you have to speak to them by looking them in the eye, as I'm doing now to this young lady who just became Kipling a moment ago. And if you do that, if you look, you can talk about anything, honestly. But the minute you think, well, oh, she's 10, she's not going to understand this, or she's French, she won't understand things in England, or vice versa, all you're doing is belittling them. And you mustn't do that to children. You must give them the opportunity to reach for knowledge and understanding. Otherwise, why should they bother? You know, if you are going to treat them endlessly as little things and treat them like little things, then you're not having a proper relationship with them.
And it seems as well a way to, particularly from a perspective of vocabulary, to sow the seeds of sort of an appreciation for the magic of language. I mean, I remember at school being made to memorize the Charge of the Light Brigade without having any sense of what it was about. And I'm sure it was explained to us, but I didn't retain it. But the rhythm of the language and the rhythm of the poetry has stuck with me for the last 30 years.
Yeah, it stays there and stays, and that helps you also, which is wonderful. It helps you become the writer that you can be yourself, because unless you hear poetry like that, read poetry like that, and read other people's work, you can't find your own voice. You find your own voice through other people. This is it's only happens if you've had this richness of understanding of the magic of words, of the music of words, the proximity of words one to the other. But that only happens by reading.
And this refusal to sort of to raise barriers between, for example, adults and children.
Yeah.
It seems to apply to a lot of your work as well. I mean, we just heard about your attitude to ecological concerns, and for example, the role that animals will often play in your work. And again, there seems to be this sense of refusing to accept that, you know, humans are one thing and animals are another thing, and the sort of and never the twain shall meet. In fact, there seems to be this constant desire to investigate the potential for learning that humans can have from animals and vice versa.
Yes, I mean, I've learnt that myself through work that I've done with Claire. Claire started this charity called Farms for City Children some time ago, and we've been for 40 years having these kids down on the farm from big cities, living and working alongside the animals, and we worked with them for certainly 25 years or more. And I was in a really privileged position to see something that most other adults don't witness, and that is how the relationship between young people and the various creatures, whether they be wild or farm animals, is simply a relationship between two sentient creatures. And so I've observed children walking into a stable with a horse, and I don't know horses very well, not sure I know children very well, but what I was able to recognize immediately was if the child is quiet and calm and speaks in a low voice, then the animal is calm, and when the animal is calm, the child loses fear, and bit by bit by bit, this trust builds up between them. This is not sentimental. It happens, and we are absolutely, as far as I'm concerned, simply one of these sentient beings. We happen to have an extraordinary intelligence, and we have a larynx, which is really, really good, which means we can make language and we can make speech, and elephants don't do that necessarily very well. But they have huge love and care of each other. They have social groupings. I mean, you can see if you put a horse out in the field and you put another horse out in the field, they're going to want to get to know each other, just like we do. And they have fights from time to time, just like we do. There's so much that is just like, and so little that is not like. So yes, we are all one sort of species, really, I would say. And I'm very firmly convinced that when we destroy what is around us that's living, we do it without understanding. So, for instance, I know people will laugh at this maybe, but seems to me a perfectly reasonable theory that trees know each other. That if you cut down a tree that's been there alongside another tree for hundreds of years, that affects the other tree. I've no doubt it affects. How? I've no idea. but I know this is a living creature, and the world changes about them, and they have to get used to that. Now, we can call it grief, but that's a human word about a human emotion. But it seems to me to be completely reasonable that they have feelings of one sort or another which we can't necessarily comprehend.
It's interesting what you say about children seeming to be able to connect with animals more naturally than perhaps adults. Why do you think that is? Are we educated out of it? Is it
the wonderful thing about children is they don't do fear early on. They have to be taught fear. They can swim naturally if you do it early enough. But we are always telling children, no, don't go there, that's dangerous, this is dangerous, or whatever. And in the end, they begin to be fearful. And that's one of the awful things about, telling children, never talk to strangers. Well, everyone's a stranger, for God's sakes. So you don't talk to people, which is why we wander city streets, and we never even look each other in the eye anymore, because we're all fearful of each other. That seems to be no way to bring children up. You have to bring children up to understand that, yes, there is wickedness in the world, but there's also another side to human nature, which is generous, which is open and warm-hearted. And so to make them frightened early on in their lives means they're going to live their lives in a poorer way, I think.
And that sense of the generosity to human nature, it's something we find you've written a lot about war.
Yeah.
But one thing I've noticed is that there's never a sense of taking sides. There's never a sense of the story is set up with the good guys on one side and the bad guys on the other side. There are perhaps worse actions on one side than another, but there's always, for example, in The Mouth of the Wolf, we find a sort of a sympathetic German officer who's crucial to the story. And I wonder if maybe the presence of animals, for example, in Warhorse, allows you to bring sort of clarity to that position. And a horse, as we know in Warhorse, the horse doesn't take sides one way or the other, whether the army is British or German.
It just depends on how the horse is being treated more than anything else. No, absolutely. I mean, the longer I live, the more I know it to be true, that when we start characterizing certain nations and groups as being one thing or the other, we immediately create the next problem or the next war. It is undeniably the case that if you are German, if you are French, if you are British, in the last 2 world wars or whatever, there were some pretty horrible people on all sides, actually. And what is also the case to me, and I think it's very important for me, is that when you're bringing up children now, post those 2 world wars, you're bringing them into a world where we have learnt that wars don't solve things. We still do it, but we haven't done it in Europe in a major way for some time now. So maybe that is a lesson learnt, and that is, at some point, French people who had a great deal of reason to dislike German people, and vice versa, have stopped doing that, by and large. Well, what does that do? It leaves room for people to travel more, to get to know each other, to understand each other, to learn languages, to go to their universities, to exchange schools, so that the whole thing then becomes interesting, because it's a culture. Your nationality is your culture, that's for sure. But with our generation now of young children, they have an opportunity, if certain people don't spoil it, of spending a lot of time in the company of people who a generation ago, that wouldn't have been at all possible. And I think that's the hope of the future.
If I've got my calculations correct, you were born during the Second World War.
Yes, I do look a lot younger than that, I know. But I was born in 1940.
I couldn't quite believe it.
No, 1943 I was born, yes.
So I'm curious about your fascination with the subject of war. What do you think it is that brings you back to it?
I don't think it's a fascination. I just think it's the time you're born, and the circumstances into which you were born. I was born, as I said, in 43, so my world growing up was London, bombed. It was adults who were probably, quite a lot of them, traumatized by what had just happened. Most families had either lost someone or knew a neighbour who had died. There was grief all around you. I didn't know what it was, but I did know that there wasn't a lot of laughter going on. I played in bomb sites. I didn't know what bomb sites, why they were bomb sites. And actually, they made really, really good playgrounds. They were wonderful. You had cellars to go down into and hide. You had walls to climb up, and there was birds' nests to look into. I mean, it was wonderful, wonderful. But I had no idea what had happened until you started to discover the truth of what had happened bit by bit by bit. And they were little things, but they were images that stayed very strongly in your mind. So on the way to my school, St. Matthias, on the Warwick Road in London, on foggy mornings, you'd walk past this sort of shadow outside the shop where people used to go buy their cigarettes and sweets. And he'd always be there, and I used to walk by on the other side of the road because I was frightened of him. He was a soldier, and he had one leg, and the other was just a trouser leg folded over. And he had a little Jack Russell Terrier with a hat, and you were supposed to drop money in it. Well, I never in my life dropped my leg because I didn't want to get close enough to him. And part of the reason was I didn't want to look at the leg, or the absence of leg. Someone at some point told me he had been wounded badly in the war. And then there was someone who used to come to tea, and I've never forgotten this man, friend of my stepfather's, used to come to tea. He was very, very smartly dressed, and he'd been in the RAF. And he'd been shot down, and he'd been really badly burnt. So that half his face, the skin was sort of stretched and discoloured, and an ear was gone, and there were fingers missing. And my mother used to always tell me, don't stare at him, Michael. And I tried really, really hard. And Eric would come in and he'd sit down and you'd have tea. And he had a watch chain. I never forgotten, he had a watch chain on his waistcoat. And I thought, well, if you look at the watch chain, but keep your eye on the watch chain, keep your eye on the watch chain. So I'd look at the watch chain and look at the watch chain, and bit by bit by bit, after the tea or the crumpets or the toast, your eyes would go up and you'd be looking at his face. And I was horrified, fascinated. To me, growing up in those times, these were the great heroes, of course. And again, I didn't know what had caused that. I now know this man. He's 95 now. And I apologised to him about 7 or 8 years ago. And I said, I'm sorry I stared at you. And he said, no, he said something wonderful. He said, you know, it was really wonderful because most people look away. And I was just looking, oh my God, this is... But that's what I learned. I learned that flesh is burnt in war, that limbs are lost, that buildings are knocked down. The other thing that happened is that my family got split up. That's another collateral damage of war, which people don't think about. The families are broken apart. So my father was away at the war, my mother decided to take up with someone else, and so you had a divorce in the family. So, I mean, the divorce rate went up by 4 times after the Second World War. I didn't know about the statistics, but I did know it happened in my family. I didn't blame anyone. It's just how the thing happened. Huge amount of disruption of society went on. And, so you write about what you care about, what you know about. That's all it is, really.
And there seems, I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on current politics, but it's interesting because I
don't know why not. I like being angry about them, but go on.
There just does also seem to be, particularly in Britain at the moment, a sort of almost fetishization of the Second World War, and people talking about the Blitz spirit, and this is the kind of thing that we need again in Britain, and in the context of Brexit and everything like that.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to hear somebody talk from having grown up at that time, but talk from the other perspective. It seems like sort of that sort of fetishization is as far away from you as it could possibly be.
Well, it's deep insecurity what we're talking about, really. I mean, I think the war does. We're sitting in France, for God's sakes. Each nation does this, but I think at this particular moment we're all in sort of trouble. Because we seem to have stopped thinking about how other people are. Maybe it's because our education has not been as strong as it should be, that we have not learnt our history and we haven't learnt understanding. But I do think it's we have got to the stage where no one, I think, in Britain, or very few, comprehend why Europe happened, why this coming together of France and Germany at a certain point happened. And someone, actually, a Frenchman, had told me not long ago, do you realise that just before, whatever it was, before the middle of the 20th century, France and Germany had been at war with each other for 300 years, every 30 years. And it stopped. And it stopped because trade and getting to know each other makes it stop. There's a wonderful logic to the whole thing. And everyone seems to have forgotten that. And it's never mentioned. Everyone keeps talking about deals, the word deal. I think Trump invented the word deal. And the word deal is how people are dealing with this. And it's not. It was an attempt to make peace. And actually, it was a really successful attempt. Lots of things wrong with Europe, don't get me wrong. But there's lots of things wrong with each of our countries. But this is an attempt to join people together, which I think is full of hope. I've had it all my life. And so I find it very hard when people then revert to type and feel very insecure about who they are. Now, Britain is in a strange case. It's an island. People in France don't realise that either. It's an island. And therefore, what happens, and we know this, you are cut off. You're cut off in all sorts of ways. It's not just La Manche or the English Channel that cuts you off. It's all sorts of history. But what is forgotten in England is how the last two conflicts affected, say, France. We have no experience at all in our history of, no living experience at all, no memories of soldiers in foreign uniforms walking our streets and telling us what to do and telling us what to think and trying to humiliate us. It simply didn't happen. We had bombs, but we didn't have the other thing. And all of Europe had this, except us, pretty much. So it's, unless you know that, unless you understand and respect other people's history, then you're not going to understand why this Europe thing happened. Yeah, we've made mistakes in Europe, of course we have, everyone has, but I just think it annoys me so much that we don't know enough of our history. I mean, the French are the same. They haven't got a clue how much it affected us when William the Conqueror came over and beat us up. It wrecked everything. We had a perfectly decent language before they came over, and then they spread their French words around, restaurant and things like that in our language. And no, I joke, but you know our language. I mean, if we have a jewel, the English, if we have a jewel that we can pat ourselves on the back for, it's our language. Look at this bookshop. It's full of English. It's a most beautiful language, but where does the language come from? It comes from all over. It comes from Latin, it comes from Greek, it comes from French, it comes from Scandinavia, it comes from Germany. It's a European language. So get over it.
Yeah. Which in a sense, and I'll make this my final question before we hear from In the Mouth of the Wolf and open up for audience questions, in a sense that brings us back to storytelling, in fact, and the power of stories. It seems at the moment in Britain, and not just in Britain, but the story which has taken dominance, the story which is winning, is perhaps one that is based on an incorrect understanding of history, or at least a limited understanding of history. And it seems in a sense that might be where the fight is won or lost, in fact.
Yes, but we haven't lost it. The great thing is the hope of these little ones here. Because if you educate them properly in 30, in 40 years' time, they are going to have more knowledge and therefore more understanding. It is all about education. The whole thing is about education. Why we can't see that, I have no idea. So, for instance, when in Britain, we've done this through our austerity policy, we've closed down libraries. I don't know if this has happened in France, but it's happened a lot. So what are you doing? You're taking away from people who might not necessarily be able to afford to go to a bookshop and buy a book. You're taking away from them an access to knowledge and to understanding at a very early age. You're condemning them, in fact, to not understanding. And it's so obvious, the whole thing. So the notion that you can sit around in a council in some town and say, well, we're going to close down the library, we'll keep the swimming pool open, that's fine, but the library will close down because people don't notice. Well, you'll notice 20 years on, 30 years on. And I just think we just got the wrong priorities. Education is the key so that people know their Kipling.
Can we hear a little bit from In the Mouth of the Wolf?
Yes, In the Mouth of the Wolf. What's really lovely about reading is that we had Jim Field, who was the illustrator, here earlier on, and we have Barou here. I'm sorry, he's French, but he can't help that. And he did these wonderful illustrations. In fact, it was his idea to write the book. Here's a bit of Anglo-French collaboration going on. we met, had a lovely lunch in Paris, and we wanted to find a way we could work together. And I told him the story of my two uncles, which I'd always wanted to write and never had a reason really to sit down and do it. And I had these two uncles. One, Francis, was a teacher just before the Second World War, a very tall man, very charismatic man, and turned out to be a very brave man. He was a pacifist. He was a socialist. He was a pacifist. And his younger brother, Peter, my other uncle, was an actor, very handsome. That runs in my family. And he was an extraordinary actor. He was very good at it. The war came along, and he decided to join up immediately and join the RAF, and his brother Francis remained a pacifist and was sent to do farm work for the war effort up in Lincolnshire in the east of England, and there he got married and he had a baby, and he was just nursing his baby one night when he heard the news that his brother had been killed aged 21 in the RAF. So he suddenly thought, well, I can't just sit here, and they've killed my brother. If they come here, they're very likely to do damage to me or my friends or my family. I have to join up. But he didn't want to join the army because he didn't like uniforms and didn't like being told what to do. And so he joined something called the Special Operations Executive and was dropped into France as a secret agent. And he had this extraordinary 2.5, 3 years in France towards the middle and the end of the Second World War in the south of France. He worked alongside 10,000 members of the French resistance, and he was very good at it. I don't know quite why he was so good at it, except that I think his judgment was very good about who to trust and who not to trust. So he never slept more than 2 nights in the same place. He attracted loyalty with English people and with French people. He's very fond of the French. Became later in his life completely passionate about France. Anyway, I had always wanted to write their stories because they went on such different paths. And extraordinary things happened to this uncle who stayed in France. He was eventually captured by the Gestapo near a place called Digne, south of France. And he was condemned to be shot. I won't tell you what happened, otherwise you won't buy the book. But all I can tell you is this, that I've never in my life ever written a book which is non-fiction before. And this is non-fiction because I didn't need to improve on it. In terms of a story, it is quite extraordinary what happened to him and his family. And I know when I was thinking of writing it, I talked to my cousin, his daughter, and I said that I'd like to do this, and she encouraged me to do it because she wanted it told as well, I think. It's not known about, really. And she just happened to say, well, it'd be lovely, because I did talk to Francis a bit just before he died. He had a party in the village. He lived in a village called Le Pouget, not far from Montpellier, that part of France. And the French people there gave him a birthday party when he was 90. And he was called Monsieur le Colonel. And he was still walking out every morning down the street to fetch his Guardian from the shop. But he became very much part of that community, and they gave him this birthday party. And so I began this story during his birthday party. The first chapter I'll just read to you. It's called Happy Birthday to Me. They gave me such a jolly party today. Everyone from the village came. 90 years old I am. I'm walking a bit stooped these days, and my knees and hips are more rickety than they should be, but I can walk up into the village, and I still like a good meal and a good glass of red wine. I had plenty of that this evening. Sleep does not come so easily as it did, but I mustn't grumble. I have my memories and friends all around me, and family too, those who are still alive. What more could an old man want? No, a better memory would be good. I'm fine with faces and places. It's the years that get muddled, jumbled up. I spend my time trying to unjumble them. The village mayor made a generous speech and said how honoured they were to have Monsieur le Colonel Francis Camartz, such a great man and such a great friend to the people of Le Pouget and of France, living here in their little French village, and with his family too. The school children stood in the courtyard with their Union Jack and tricolour flags and sang Sur le pont d'Avignon and London Bridge is falling down as well, and everyone clapped and sang Happy Birthday to you in English, and in French, Joyeux anniversaire. A little girl stepped forward to present me with some flowers, red, white and almost blue irises. Lovely. The mayor said she was the newest girl in the school, that she had recently come from the Punjab to live in the village. She spoke with quiet dignity and in good French. I am Jupchapun Kaur, from all the children in Le Pouget. I wish you a most happy birthday. I repeated her name again and again to be sure I was pronouncing it right. She smiled at me and told me that Kaur meant princess. The flowers, she said, came from her garden. I was so glad at that moment that we come back to live in France, but sad that not all of us were here, that Nan and our Christine were not with us, several others too. I miss them more today than ever, but I have Paul, and I have Nicky and Jay, a wonderful son and 2 dear daughters, and little Kia, who is no longer little at all. Grandchildren who grow up even faster than your own children. I should be thankful. And I am. But I am in the dusk of my life, a dusk that is streaked with joys and sadnesses. I was suddenly tired and longing for the solitude and quiet of my little room and bed. I waved them all goodbye. Jay helped me into the house and into bed, hugged me and left. What children I have. What friends they are to me. So here I am now. In my bed, night has fallen, the bright moon shining in through the window, and the church bell striking midnight. My Scops owl hoots his birthday greeting to me. I smile in the moonlight and settle back on my pillows. I know I won't sleep. This is a night for remembering. I want to remember everyone who wasn't here at my party, all my good companions in life, who held my hand, stroked my brow, helped me through. I want to see them again, be with them again, live all my life with them again, from my sandpit days to now. 90 years. And then each chapter after that, he really speaks to the people in his life who are the most important. His father, his brother who was killed, his wife, his mistress, people who fought with him in the resistance. It's about 8 chapters when he meets these people and tells them and asks them really to try. He wants to feel close to them again. Anyway, so we put this story together. The wonderful Baru sitting there did these extraordinary drawings and went down to Le Pouget, and I think he lay on my Uncle Francis's bed and looked out of the window and drew the view that I've just mentioned, so that you can see the church tower and the moon above the church tower. So he went there and he talked to my cousin and became very close to, I think, the whole story. The best portraits ever done of my uncle are in this book. They're very, very moving, particularly the one right at the end. So there we are. That's In the Mouth of the Wolf. It's been translated into French because the French have very good taste.
On which note, it's over to you. If you have a question for Michael Morpurgo, we have a few minutes. We'll get a microphone to you so everybody can hear you. Just raise your hand. Anybody who would like? Well, you could begin with my microphone.
It's just I've been recently told at school that books can't change the world and that they can only criticize it. I just wanted your opinion on that.
Who told you that?
My teacher.
Oh, yes. Well, what I'd say, I suppose I would say, I think if you believe that they can criticize the world, which they do, then they can also change it. It's either neither or both. To me, it's both, and we should criticize it. There's a lot that's wrong, and it's fine to write about that. But I have a really strong feeling that the most important thing that happens in books is it's not a propaganda exercise. It's about encouraging children through literature to think for themselves. That's the most important thing. In the doing of that, of learning to understand, learning to empathize, they can grow their mind, their intellect, their emotion in a way I think that nothing else can. I mean, the wonderful thing about a book is that you join in this conspiracy. It's just words on a page. Occasionally with a picture or two. But by and large, it's words on a page. They mean nothing until you bring your life to it, your emotions to it, your intellect to it. And that activity is so, so important because it means you're joining in this story. You are imagining it. If you read Tolstoy's War and Peace, you read it, Tolstoy only did half the work. You do the rest, and you bring it to life, which is what he wants, which is what every writer wants. And that allows you to live through the story and understand the world better when you come out of it. So I would say your teacher is right, but she or he is also wrong. But please do not go back there, because I do not want nasty emails landing on my thing. No, but it's an interesting question. Thank you for it. Is this at college, or where are you at?
High school.
In France?
Yes.
So a lycée? Is it, and you call that a high school?
Yeah.
That's okay. That's not an accurate translation, but it's not bad.
Okay, we had a young lady there. Then there's a couple more.
So we were talking about you writing during war, and one thing I like about your books is you write in lots of different countries, like they take place around the world.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you've ever had any trouble trying to stay within historical and geographical confines?
No, I just look for more. When I've finished with one confine, I tend to go to another, and then try, if I possibly can, to have some connection. It's important to have a connection of some sort, and sometimes I fake it. No question about that. I read a story which I'm really fond of. What's it called? Hang on, what's it called, Claire? What's that one I wrote about Tibet and the Yetis? King of the Cloud Forest. I've got this very strong memory, as you can tell. King of the Cloud Forest. Well, I wanted to write this story because I read this wonderful article. This is what leads you on. You read an article or you speak to someone, have a conversation. This was an article about whether Yetis were true or not, but it was what was wonderful. It was a mountaineer, an Austrian mountaineer, a very famous Austrian mountaineer, who had climbed a mountain called K2. And when he was on the way down, he climbed it, and he was on the way down, and in the article he wrote this, so it must be true. He opened his tent up one morning after a blizzard, and there was this creature crouching in the snow. Now, he knew well enough that Himalayan bears didn't come that high, and also something extraordinary happened. As he was looking at this creature, it stood up on two legs. So we're not talking about fantasies. He had plenty of fame already, this man. He said, I thought I saw a Yeti. And I thought, well, maybe there is another species, human species, which is wiser than we are, not so destructive, and has taken refuge in these high mountains and hides away and hides away and hides away. Maybe that's possible. And then you work on that theory and suddenly the story starts coming. That's all it is, really. So I travelled in my mind to the Himalayas, and I read lots of books, saw lots of photographs, talked to people who've been there. And then I went and did my research in Switzerland. And you know what I discovered? There are no Yetis in Switzerland. They really aren't there at all. But I loved writing a book. So I do explore, and islands. I'm always writing about islands. So I go to the Scilly Isles off Cornwall every summer. But I've written about islands in the Coral Sea, in the Pacific. Well, you can do it if you've been to one island, you've been to them all. For goodness, they grow different plants, but the sea's all around, And I'm about to set off on another story just now, which is going to be an island, and it's going to be an imagined island, and it won't be that different from islands that I imagined. I wrote a book called Kenski's Kingdom, which is an island in the Coral Sea. Yeah, I did my research and stuff like that. But the most important thing, in fact, wasn't the island. It was the relationship between this ancient Japanese soldier left behind from the Second World War and a young English boy who finds himself lost on the island. And it's this longing to write stories that tell you more about relationships, really, because these two dislike each other intently. They're fearful of each other, and the whole book really is about the harmony that grows between them, and indeed the harmony between this man Kensky and the landscape around. So I'm not quite sure why you asked the question, but I'm very glad you did, because it gave me the opportunity to rattle on about 2 more books that people can go and buy.
Okay. The young man in the red coat. Oh, we'll pass you the microphone.
What made you want to be a writer?
In the first place, it's an accident. All good things in life, I have to tell you this right now, are an accident. There's no point in having any ambition. Stuff happens, you know? And then you can have ambition once the stuff happens. With me, all it was this. I didn't really know what I wanted to be when I was growing up. Bizarrely, for reasons I won't go into now, I joined the army. It was mostly because I liked the uniform and I looked really good in it. Then I met my wife, who thought I looked really good in a uniform, and decided to take it off me. I don't mean that literally. I mean, she decided this wasn't necessarily the best thing for me and I wasn't suited to it. So I took the uniform off, and then I found myself at university, and then I became a teacher, and then I found myself in for a class of children just like you. Just as horrible as you, 35 of them. And I had to keep little monsters like you quiet at the end of the day. Now, in English, do you go to French schools or English schools?
English and French.
Both?
Yeah.
Oh, well, then you have better knowledge than me. But all I can tell you is in England, by and large, between 3 and half past is the last half hour of school, in primary school. And I taught 10 and 11-year-olds. And I'm telling you that to keep 10 and 11-year-olds quiet at the end of the day, when they don't want to be there, and you want to go home anyway, you just want to get through the half hour. And the head teacher had said, look, what we do with that last half hour is we read stories to these children. Don't ask them questions. And it was a brilliant idea. It should happen in every school in the world, not just in England, in where I live in Devon. You read the stories. You engage the children with stories. And then you just say bye-bye. It's the most marvellous idea. No comprehension questions. Nothing like that at all. You just tell them a story. And I ran out of stories to read. I was starting to read a new book, and I looked up, and I looked at these 35 faces looking back at me. What, are you about 10 or 11?
I'm 10.
Yeah, it's just the revolting age. This is what you do. I'm here to tell you. This is what you do when you really don't like the teacher. Watch my face. This is what your face would be like at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you just want to go home. You look like this. It means I hate you. I quite like to kill you. And I want to go home. That's all. And when they're responding to you like that, 35 of them, you really want to make them listen. I went home to my wife. I said, this is hopeless. I'm reading this book. They're not listening. I don't know what to do. And she said, well, if they're not liking it, don't go back tomorrow and bore them. What you need to do is to make up a story of your own. You're quite a good liar, Michael. Why don't you go back there and just invent one of your lies, tell it and develop it? And I dared to do it. And I got into 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I started telling this story. And for the first 5 minutes, it was still the same bleh, horrible face, looking out the window, picking their noses. Do they pick their noses in France? Does that happen? I'm sure it does. Anyway, there I am, trying to get them all going. And suddenly, after 10 minutes of telling this story, I find they're all looking at me. And their mouths are going like this. And their eyes are widening. And you think, hang on, this is working. And then I decided why it was working, and it was just a moment. I knew. The reason was I meant it. Every single one I was telling them in the story, I believed, and I found they were believing it too. And then it got to 3:30, this is quite true, 3:30 in the afternoon, and the school bell went, and they all went, oh, sir. And I thought, yeah. I really loved that moment, and I thought, well, I can do this. And you know when you discover, and you may have discovered it already, you can do something. You just want to go on doing the same thing. It's just how we are. Do you like writing?
Yeah.
Well, don't do it. I don't want any more competition.
Okay, we're going to take 3 more questions. So 1, 2, and 3. So we'll begin with the young gentleman just with his hand there. Yeah.
Why do you like using animals in your books?
I don't know how to use them. That's a very, very harsh word. I understand what you mean. We'll have an argument about it later. No, I do use them. You're quite right. Yes, I'm a terrible manipulator. It's awful. Why do I do it? I tell you what it is, really. It is because, this is personal, when I was little, I really liked all sorts of animals. And where I lived, in fact, there's someone in this room who was there with me growing up and will confirm to you later that I was a boy once. And we had a dog called Prin, and I loved this dog. And after a while, my parents decided that they didn't like the dog because the dog kept running away. And so while I was away at school, because I went to a boarding school, like Harry Potter, only it was real, my parents gave the dog away. So that when I came home, there was no dog. So I was really upset. And at a certain point after that, I think they thought I needed another pet. So I got a goldfish. And the goldfish died. No, but they do. And then when they die, they float upside down. And I remember burying this goldfish in the garden of this house. And I remember exactly where it is. And it really meant a lot to me. And after that, I had no animals at all until I got married to this lady. And she quite liked the idea of having a dog. And then we started having dogs. And then we had children after we had dogs. It's bizarre, isn't it, really? No, I just missed them when I was young. And I suppose I've been fascinated by them. And I want to live with them. Wanted to live with them ever since. That's what it is. And I am fascinated with places where there's lots of wildlife. Where I live in Devon, in the southwest of England, when I go for my walk each day, I see herons. I can see where the otters have been. You don't very often see otters, but they leave little poos behind, little spraints. And I like that. I like following the traces of them. I see little dippers in the river and buzzards in the sky. So I'm very, very fond of wildlife. And when I go to the Isles of Scilly, you can see whales sometimes out in the channel and oyster catchers. And I'm very connected to all that. But I think it's all because my parents gave away my dog. So they did me a favour in a way.
This young lady in the pink coat, just here.
Okay,
yeah.
What's your favourite book?
Do you mean my rubbish or someone else's rubbish?
Your books.
Oh dear. Well, interestingly, I've just been meeting yesterday with someone else who's in the room, where I won't point fingers, who is an animator, makes films. And they're trying to make an animated series of a book of mine, which is called Listen to the Moon. And I think in a way it is one of my favourite stories, because it's sort of, it is about a terrible tragedy in the first place, but it's also about survival. You can live through the worst of times, the worst of times, and you can come through it. And it's a story really which I just read. I just happened to come across this. You won't have heard this. There's a ship called the Lusitania. And in 1915, this is around about the beginning of the First World War, the Lusitania was travelling from New York to Liverpool, coming across the Atlantic. Well, in the Atlantic there were German U-boats, submarines, and looking to sink any ships that were connected somehow to the war effort on the part of Britain and the Allies. Anyway, the Germans did something quite extraordinary. They announced to the world in the New York Times, before the ship sailed, they said, "Do not sail on this ship, because we know it's carrying arms and ammunition which is against the law of the sea as far as we are concerned, and it becomes a target. You get on that ship and you sail across the Atlantic, you are a proper target because you have military equipment on board." They ignored it completely. 2,000 people got on board that ship, and they sailed, lovely journey apparently, lovely weather, for 5 days across the Atlantic, and just off the south coast of Ireland, near a place called Kinsale, 12 miles off, a German submarine spotted them and put a torpedo into the side. The ship blew up. It sank in 3 minutes. The Titanic took over 3 hours to sink, and we know what happened there. So this literally, and the loss of life was terrible. They saw it from Ireland, from the coast. They saw the ship blow up and go down. So what they did, all these men from Kinsale and women, they got in their boats, and because there was no motor boats, and they rowed out. 12 miles to row out is a lot. And they rowed there, and they came across the debris on the sea, yes, dead bodies, and some survivors. And on the record that I read, this is why I wrote the book, they came across a child on the grand piano from the dining room. On these ships, they had very sort of posh life. And in the dining room, there was always a huge grand piano. And this girl had climbed on, or boy, I can't remember what it was now, climbed on board, and they rescued this child. And I thought of the image of it. I just thought of what that must have looked like on the ocean. It was flat calm, and there was this extraordinary shape at the top of the piano, and a child lying on it. So I thought I will tell the story of that child. Necessarily what happens, I'm sure, in something like that is that you suffer terribly from living through something as dreadful as that, the things that you must have seen. So it's about that child arriving somehow, and I'm not going to tell you how, on the Isles of Scilly, which is the nearest landfall. And extraordinary things happen then which people don't know about, and it links up to what you were saying earlier. In that time of the war, it was really common for German U-boats to surface and even to pick up people who had been in the sea or in lifeboats, and then they would take them back to Germany or whatever. In this case, they took them to the Isles of Scilly, which luckily for me is off the west coast of England. And if you go to the Isles of Scilly, which I hope you will one day, you'll see there are about 5 inhabited islands, and one of the uninhabited islands, looks inhabited. This is because it has a house on it. It's called a pest house. And a pest house was a place which for a couple of 100 years in the time of sailing ships, when people came close to British shores, and I'm sure it happened in France too, if anyone was sick on board, something that was catching and they were worried about it, they would literally put them on this island and leave them there because they didn't want to bring the disease to the country. And it was called a pest house. And that's what happened. For hundreds of years it was used as a pest house. And in my story, this German submarine sees the island, it's England, and sees this house. And they put the girl ashore. Well, there's no one on the island. And she has to survive on this island. Anyway, it's called Listen to the Moon. And they're making this series of films really about it. So I suppose in my head that would be a book that now I'm thinking about a lot. It's very interesting when you've written a book, you tend after a while to forget about it because other stories come along and take its place. Have you got have you got many brothers and sisters? One?
I've
two?
got a few step-siblings.
Right.
And a sister.
Well, you do need to know, just to reassure you, that because another one comes along, it doesn't mean to say that no one cares about you. But books are a bit like that. You get really fond of the one that people are thinking about now. And because I had this conversation with this man yesterday, that book is in my head a lot. If you ask me the question tomorrow or the next day, then I give you another answer, which would be more amusing, probably.
And we're going to leave our final question to our young Rudyard Kipling down here.
Oh, not her again, for goodness sake. Yes, what's your name for a start?
Sophie.
Sylvie.
Sophie.
I had a dog called Sophie once. She was extremely sweet, but really disobedient. Yes, do speak, Sophie, by all means.
How much time did it take you to write In the Mouth of the Wolf?
That's a really good question, and the strange answer is just about all my life, because that story, and I'm sure it's the same with almost everyone in this room, in most families there is a story which everyone in the family knows, and it stays with you and stays with you and stays with you. It may not be dramatic, but it's a story which the family all knows something about. And that story has inhabited me really all my life, the story of my 2 uncles. So you could say it's taken me a really long time to write it, but I know what you mean by the question. When I finally decided to write it, mostly because this man Bahu made me do it, and it's very important that someone actually is pushing you to do it, and in a way that it was written so that he could illustrate it, which is really good for me, because I had then to sit down, think about it, do I want to write this story, talk to my relatives, sons and daughters of the people concerned, and then, yes, go for it. And when I went for it, I think it took me a very short time. I think I wrote it in certainly a month, because it's all been storing up all this time, and it just came pouring out. And when I get writing, I write really fast, but I do take a long time thinking about it. I do what I call dream time, which is what you do all the time anyway, I expect. But it's a name, which I call the time when I don't write at all. And most writers, I think, spend most of their life doing dream time. And then when they got to sit down and write, do you write stories of your own?
Sometimes I try, and in school, in French, we have a picture, and we have to write like a little story about it.
A story about it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you enjoy doing that?
Yes, I think it's very fun.
You enjoy it. And do you write poetry or prose, stories more than anything else?
Stories.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll say what this young man said, just don't become too good, because I don't want any more writers out there. Just far too much competition around. Go away.
On which note, that is all we've got time for, at least for our conversation tonight. However, the evening is far from over. Once we vacate the stage, we'll be welcoming up Lex Poulsen for now what has become the traditional Shakespeare and Company Christmas carols session. We will have song sheets for you to join in. We will be serving mulled wine and mince pies. And Michael will be dedicating books in our children's section. Now, so that you know, Michael has already signed all of our books for us. So if you're just happy with the signature in your book, you can buy that straight at the till, and there's no need to queue up. If you would like a dedication, the queue is going to begin just in this direction, just round there by the children's section. A couple of things about that. First of all, we're going to be giving queue priority to the children. So it's getting late. Children have got homes and beds to go to. So please, adults in the queue, please don't get grumpy about that. The second thing, Michael has let it be known that we are currently selling these badges at the front of the store now. These include the shop's motto, which is "Be not inhospitable to strangers, lest they be angels in disguise." These are available for €2 at the front. For every badge sold, we give €1 to Médecins Sans Frontières, who are doing fantastic work with refugees in France and around the world. So Michael has let it be known that he will look very kindly on people who come for dedications if you come bearing your badge.
I don't think I said look very kindly. It is a rule. It's a rule.
It's a rule.
If you want your book with your name in it, you have to pay. How much money did we say? Was it €5? I can't remember.
Well, the badges are €2. But
the badges are €2. There has to be a donation to this wonderful charity. So, none of you mind that, do you?
No.
We'll be a bit more enthusiastic.
So all of the books are available at the till. As I say, there will be carols, there will be mulled wine, there will be mince pies, there will be dedications in the children's section. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Happy holidays to all of you. And please join me one more time in saying thank you to Michael Morpurgo.
I'm going to sing my song. It's all right.
One moment. My mistake. I forgot the most important thing of the evening. The caroling will begin with a solo.
Now, because it's Christmas, I thought I'd leave you with a song. The door, by the way, has been bolted. You cannot leave. I thought it's quite a short song, but I thought it'd be interesting because the play of War Horse is coming to Paris next December, the National Theatre production, and it's going to be on at this place. Is it called the? What was it? The what? Scène Musicale, apparently, in December. So I thought I'd sing you a carol from this, or try to sing you a carol from this play. And if those of you know War Horse will know the story a bit. This is really, it's an important song to me because I've lived with it for 10 years now because it's been on. And it's a carol from the play. It's called The Lambkin in the Manger, and it's written by a man called John Tams, who was the songmaker in the play. I'm just going to have a little sip of water to make sure that I don't growl too much. You're putting your coat on as if you wish to leave. I don't blame you at all. My wife has already left. Here we go. The lambkin in the manger, The light upon the lea, the moorland yields to glory, the shepherds bend the knee, and all are wrapped in grace, and all are gifted mirth. Peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, goodwill upon all earth. The ploughboy and his traces, the line upon the land, all gifts by nature's graces, her bounty to command, and all are wrapped in grace, and all are gifted mirth. Peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, goodwill upon all earth. Our ploughboy went to Flanders, he'll not be coming home. He lies forever there now, no more his fields to roam. And he is wrapped in grace, and he is gifted mirth. Peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, goodwill upon all earth. Tommy in the meadow, Poilu in the byre, Tommy on the fire step, Poilu on the wire. They all are wrapped in grace, and all are gifted mirth. Peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, goodwill upon all earth. The lambkin in the manger, the light upon the lea, the moorland yields to glory, the shepherds bend the knee, and all are wrapped in grace, and all are gifted mirth. Peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, peace walks upon this blessed land, goodwill upon all earth.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming along, all of you.